The year the college entrance exams were reinstated, I tore up my answer sheet in front of everyone and went up the mountain to herd cattle. When the daughter of the farm director at the Lishan Collective, who had always looked down on everyone, heard about it, she went crazy on the spot. In my previous life, I took the college entrance exam with her. Her name was Grace. But I was branded a cheater simply because our answer sheets were identical. Since she had been the first to hand in her test, people immediately assumed I had copied her. Even my fiancé, Daniel, believed it. He didn't care about the truth. I cried out in protest everywhere, but no one believed me. In the end, I was banned from taking the exam for 3 years and stripped of my qualification to return to the city. I was forced to remain on the farm, where I endured the director's harassment day and night. Eventually, I was labeled promiscuous, beaten, and left to freeze to death in a cattle shed. My parents tried to clear my name after my death, but they were accused of being capitalist sympathizers and had their property confiscated. They died full of grief and injustice. Even at the end, I couldn't understand how the answers I had painstakingly studied and memorized turned out to be exactly the same as Grace's. Then I opened my eyes and found myself back on the day before the college entrance exam. The wind was howling outside the window. "Emily, open the door. I brought you a mock test," came Daniel's voice from outside. When I felt no pain in my body, I realized I had been reborn. The calendar on the wall was turned to the day before the exam. In my previous life, Daniel had also braved the cold to bring me a practice test. I looked at his wind-chapped face and felt a stabbing pain in my chest, because that same face, twisted with cruel features, had accused me of cheating in my past life. It was the winter of 1977. I was at home, anxiously waiting for my test results, when a group of people broke in and dragged me to the school office. I was shocked when I saw the 2 identical exam papers. Parents standing outside the exam room all took Grace's side, saying they had seen her leave the room first, so I must have copied her. To prove my innocence, I went home and brought back all the draft papers I'd used to prepare, page after page filled with dense notes, but they tore every one of them up right in front of me. Everyone knows Grace, Director Carter's daughter, is a prodigy. She's been outstanding since childhood. And you're just an average student. You really think some scribbled notes can fool anyone? Someone sneered. This daughter of a stinking intellectual just can't accept that our farm produced a genius. She tried to cheat her way into college by copying someone else. Even Daniel stood up with them and pointed at me in accusation. I had nowhere to turn. What rained down on me weren't just scraps of torn paper, but fists as well. I was banned from taking the exam for 3 years and forced back to the farm. My right to return to the city was revoked on the spot. From that moment on, Director Carter became even more blatant in harassing me, claiming it was revenge. He would grope me in front of other workers. When I resisted, he ruined my reputation. Eventually, the villagers beat me and threw me into the cattle shed. It was the depths of winter. I swallowed blood with every breath. The air was filled with the metallic taste of it. In my ears rang the shrieking voice of the director's wife. "You little whore, trying to seduce my husband? Just die already." Later, my parents were dragged into the mess. They couldn't clear my name and were instead labeled capitalists. Everything they owned was taken. They died full of hate and regret. Even thinking about it now made my whole body ache. I never expected the college entrance exam we had waited for all our lives to become a death sentence for my entire family. Now that I was reborn, I was determined to uncover the truth and restore my family's name. I would make everyone who slandered me pay. Daniel's voice rang out again. "Emily, what are you thinking about? Hurry and finish this paper. After that, we'll go to Mr. Zhao's house. Grace will be there too. Maybe we can get some hints about the questions he gave her." I looked at Daniel's honest, simple face and found it hard to connect him to the twisted, vicious person he had been in my previous life. But how had he changed so much? And why had 2 identical answer sheets appeared in the first place? Everyone on the farm said Grace was a genius, but her house didn't even have a single book, yet she always got the highest scores. Everyone praised her, but I never envied her because I could answer every question she could. I just never dared to reveal my true ability. The year I was sent to the countryside, my mother cried as she told me, "You must study hard, but don't show off too much, otherwise, it will bring disaster." So when the exam officials placed the two identical answer sheets in front of everyone, my parents were the only ones who believed me. They knew every stroke on that paper was written from years of knowledge and effort. Even before I was sent to the countryside, I had already read every book my grandfather left behind. I never gave up studying, not even for a day. With the foundation I had, I was more than capable of handling the first round of the reinstated college entrance exams. The moment I heard that Grace was at Mr. Zhou's house, I didn't even bother to look at the practice paper Daniel had brought. I grabbed my things and rushed straight to the Zhou residence. As soon as I stepped inside, I heard Grace yelling, "I'm almost done, stop rushing me." She was biting her pencil, her paper still completely blank. When she saw me walk in, her eyes paused, then she forced out a smile. There were several students in the room, and Director Carter was also there, sitting next to Grace. When I caught sight of him, I couldn't help but shudder. I quickly sat down next to Daniel. Just as I began reading the mock test, Grace suddenly began scribbling down her answers. I finished all the questions calmly, and Daniel eagerly grabbed my scratch paper to check my work, enthusiastically comparing answers with the others. Meanwhile, Grace sat with her arms folded, waiting for Mr. Zhou to grade her test. "Mr. Zhou, didn't I say I'd remember the solutions soon?" she said smugly. I leaned in to look at her problem-solving process. It was exactly the same as what I had written on my draft paper. Considering she only started writing after I arrived, I couldn't help but suspect she had seen my answers. Just as I stepped a bit closer to see more clearly, Grace suddenly shoved me back. "Emily, why are you so eager to see my paper? Don't tell me you couldn't solve it yourself and were planning to copy mine," she said sharply. Daniel's expression darkened. "Grace, that's a pretty nasty thing to say. This isn't even the real exam. What's wrong with checking your paper?" Director Carter chuckled coldly. "Well, there are people bold enough to copy others' papers during the actual college entrance exam, aren't there?" His words sent a chill down my spine, reminding me of the horrible injustice I suffered when I was falsely accused of cheating. Why were Grace and Director Carter saying these things? Could it be that they had already anticipated I'd end up with the same answers as Grace again? Daniel didn't dare argue with the director, so he turned to comfort me, telling me not to stoop to their level. Seeing him defend me stirred something in my heart again. I had hidden my true abilities and was willing to play the role of a poor student. Aside from my parents, Daniel was the only one who knew the truth. Because of that, he often stood up for me, never letting others look down on me. But in my previous life, after the exam results came out, he had been the most convinced that I had copied Grace's paper. I sat right behind them. He had said, "I saw Emily staring at Grace's test the whole time. Her grades were always average. How could she possibly write like that?" As the only witness from the exam room, every word he said pushed me deeper into despair. Looking at the concern on his face now, I couldn't figure out what had led him to betray me back then. Grace subtly leaned closer to Daniel, making casual physical contact under the guise of playful bickering. I started to wonder, had Daniel shown her my answers? But that would have had to happen in private. The actual exam hall had strict regulations. I had sat behind her. How on earth had she managed to write answers exactly like mine? My head was spinning with questions, but the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. The title of prodigy that Grace now carried hadn't existed before my mother and I were sent to the farm. Not long after we arrived, people began whispering that Director Carter's daughter was a genius. Even though she hadn't studied much at all, she could recite Tang and song poetry fluently. After that, she kept skipping grades. When news of the college entrance exams being reinstated came, she became even more enthusiastic. Thinking about all this, I stared at Grace. She noticed my gaze and turned to sneer at me, her eyes filled with provocation. "These math problems are so boring," she said. "Mr. Zhou, why don't you give us a writing prompt for practice instead?" Mr. Zhou immediately agreed, then looked at me with a kind but condescending smile. "Your foundation isn't as strong as Grace's. You can take some time to think about the prompt. If you really can't write it, don't worry about it." I smiled and accepted the topic. It was simple. Within 3 minutes, I had already outlined the entire essay in my head. Just as I was halfway through writing, Grace announced she was done. The others immediately clamored to see her work. Grace curled her lips and said in a voice just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Honestly, essays like this shouldn't be written down. If someone used my composition as their own material, I'd have no way to defend myself." Director Carter burst out laughing. "Who would dare slander my daughter? Our Grace is the #1 genius on the entire farm. If there's something she can't write, then no one else should be able to either. And if anyone does write the same thing as her, then they must have copied us." Director Carter's tone turned dark as he spoke, his eyes drifting toward me. The memories of how he had harassed me in my past life came flooding back. Just looking at him now made my stomach churn. I felt so nauseous I couldn't even speak. The other students nervously chimed in, swearing they would never copy anyone. Who would dare plagiarize the director's daughter's paper? That's like asking to get shot. After some chatter, everyone urged Mr. Zhao to start grading the papers. As soon as he glanced over Grace's essay, Mr. Zhao shouted in astonishment, "Amazing! For the very first year of reinstated exams where everyone's foundation is still weak, this kind of composition is incredibly mature. Even at a university level, this would be considered excellent." I looked down at my own draft, unfinished, and felt a rush of doubt. Could it be that Grace really was a prodigy? Someone who had mastered literature without studying, without a teacher? I stood up without caring how others might look at me and walked straight to Mr. Zhao. I took Grace's paper from his hands and stared at it. My pupils widened in disbelief. Thousands of words flowed across the page, from thesis to detailed analysis. I read every word carefully, afraid to miss even a single punctuation mark. It was exactly the same as the composition I had formed in my head. Not one word differed. I tightened my grip on my own draft. But I hadn't even finished writing it. How did she know what I was going to write next? Did she have the power to read my mind? As I stood there, overwhelmed and trying to figure out where things had gone wrong, a sudden sting shot through my hand. "Emily, what did you write? Let me see." Daniel snatched the draft from my hand. My heart dropped. "Give it back," I shouted, jumping up and tearing the paper from his grasp. In just a few quick motions, I ripped it to shreds. The students and even Mr. Zhao looked at me, confused and shocked. Daniel was clearly startled by my strange behavior, frozen where he stood. Grace raised an eyebrow and smirked. "Such a dramatic reaction. Don't tell me you wrote something you weren't supposed to. Or maybe you copied someone else's work?" All eyes turned to me at once. I clenched the scraps of paper tightly in my hand until my fingernails dug into my palm, piercing the fragile sheets. Whatever Daniel was saying, I didn't hear a word. I simply grabbed my bag and rushed out of the Zhou house. I didn't even want to imagine what would have happened if they had seen that my essay was exactly the same as Grace's. I almost ended up being accused of plagiarism, again, just like in my past life. Walking home, I felt a deep fear settle into my bones. The cold of the harsh winter wind bit through my thin sweater. My back was drenched with cold sweat. Tomorrow was the college entrance exam. If Grace and I were truly in sync like this, wouldn't our test papers end up identical again? It was terrifying, and far too strange. When I got home, my mom was sitting by the stove, tending the fire. She had once been a rich young lady who never touched cold water, but now her hands were full of calluses. When news of the reinstated exams came out, no one was happier than her. Tearfully, she told me, "Emily, I've waited so long for this day. You have to take the exam. Now that the exams are back, it's like we've finally seen the light." Looking into her hopeful eyes, I felt an unbearable heaviness in my chest. If I took the test, maybe I'd end up dying in disgrace again like I did in my past life. But if I didn't take it, I would be betraying the hope she had poured into me. I forced myself to stay calm and not let her see anything was wrong. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Are you too nervous?" I sighed and said softly, "I'm fine. It's just the first year of reinstated exams. There's still a long road ahead. If I don't pass this time, I'll just try again next time. I've worked hard for years. I'll definitely make it." The next morning, my mom got up early to prepare breakfast. She brought out the smoked meat that we had been saving for special occasions and placed it on the table. Seeing that made my heart ache, but I couldn't afford to take any chances. The college entrance exam was important. but my family's survival was even more important. I put my admission slip into my bag and headed out the door. Yes, I was going to take the exam, but I couldn't do it the same way as before. A bold idea flashed through my mind. Maybe this wasn't the best solution, but right now, I had no other choice. Grace had already taken her seat inside the exam room. Our seats were next to each other. I lingered outside the building, going over every possible scenario in my head, and only stepped in at the very last moment, just as the bell rang. The moment she saw me, she let out a subtle sigh of relief. It was small, almost imperceptible, but I noticed it. Looking back now, it seems like she had always been watching me closely. That same expression had crossed her face when I appeared at Mr. Zhao's house with the mock exam. If she could somehow know what I was thinking, then maybe she was the one feeling uneasy now. The bell rang again, and the papers were handed out. I carefully read through the first few questions. Grace started writing almost immediately. I, on the other hand, held my pen still, refusing to write anything. She continued confidently, her answers flowing across the page. I closed my eyes, I stopped thinking. I emptied my mind completely, forcing myself to forget everything related to the exam. Suddenly, the sound of her writing disappeared. It was as if her contempt and confidence were tethered to my thoughts. As long as I thought, she could respond. Once I stopped, she was stuck. So I tore it. The sharp sound of tearing paper echoed through the silent room like fate being ripped apart. "You there! What are you doing? Who gave you permission to destroy your exam paper?" the proctor shouted. I smiled slightly. "I'm sorry, sir. This question's just too difficult for me. I can't answer it. I'm giving up." Directly in front of me, Grace's back stiffened. She snapped her head around. Her eyes were icy, sharp like blades, filled with fury, like she wished she could pierce me through on the spot. I raised my hands in mock surrender. The proctor let out a helpless sigh. "What a situation. Fine, leave the room then. Don't disturb the others." I grabbed my bag and walked out of the room. The parents waiting outside were stunned to see me emerge so quickly. "She's already done?" someone whispered. "Wow, this girl must be a genius. Must be heading straight to Tsinghua or Peking University at this rate." I smiled broadly, unbothered by the noise. Among the crowd, one expression stood out. Director Carter's. His brows were furrowed so tightly that his eyes were almost hidden beneath the folds. His lips were pressed into a thin line, and his cheeks bulged as he clenched his molars. There was no doubt he was staring straight at me. Some parents waved at me, urging me to go home and eat, to rest up for the next test. I flung my backpack over my shoulder and shouted at the top of my lungs, "I'm not taking the next ones. I'm done. I'm heading home to herd cows." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by loud murmurs. What? So she was just a lousy student after all. She must have handed it in early because she had no idea what to write. People began laughing. Turns out that genius was nothing special after all, huh? I laughed too. Exactly. The first one out doesn't mean anything. But this time, Director Carter couldn't laugh. "You little brat, who gave you permission to skip the exam?" he bellowed, pushing through the crowd. In just a few long strides, he was standing right in front of me. He raised his hand and slapped me across the face. The smirk on my face seemed to infuriate him even more. He staggered a bit and raised his fist, ready to hit me again, but it never landed, because the public security officers standing nearby weren't just there for show. I only had to shout once before they surrounded him immediately. "What's going on? Why are you hitting someone outside the exam hall?" one of them demanded. I wiped the blood from the corner of my mouth, dragging it from my left cheek to my right, then said with a trembling voice full of grievance, "Uncle, please help me. This man hit me, right outside the test room. My head hurts so bad." Director Carter's eyes bulged, veins popping from his face. "You get back in there and take that test. Do you hear me?" Even as the police escorted him away, he kept yelling that I had to go back and finish the exam. Thankfully, my mom arrived just in time. Otherwise, people might have thought Director Carter was my father. Seeing how concerned she was about my exam, my mom gently cupped my face in her hands. Her eyes were full of pain. "That bastard really hit you hard," she murmured. I smiled and said, "It's okay, but I'm afraid I won't be able to take the college entrance exam this year." She froze for a second, then pulled me tightly into her arms. She didn't ask anything else, just held me and said, "If you can't take it, then you can't. You've already got all the knowledge in your head." As long as you still want to go to college, as long as the exams exist, you can always try again. I went home, grabbed 2 steamed corn buns, and headed into the hills to tend the cattle. But just as I sat down on a dirt slope, Grace came storming over. Her face was twisted with rage as she grabbed me and tried to drag me back to the exam room. I wasn't some weak girl who had never worked a day in her life. I had strength from years of farm labor. When she couldn't pull me, she started kicking and punching. I shoved her aside with one hard slap. Then Daniel showed up, panting as he caught up. "Emily, hey, go easy. She's still the director's daughter. We can't afford to offend her." Grace got up, dusted herself off, her voice half hoarse as she screamed, "I'm ordering you to go back and take that test. If you don't, I'll make sure your whole family loses their city residency." I scoffed. Losing residency is still better than dying here. Grace narrowed her eyes and gave Daniel a meaningful look. "You haven't forgotten what you promised me, have you? If your girlfriend keeps acting up, things won't go well for you either." Daniel immediately nodded and muttered something to her, speaking so softly and humbly I couldn't hear. I stood there waiting for him to explain, but he said nothing, just grabbed my arm and tried to drag me down the hill. "Emily, I know you're smart. You used to be scared of showing it, so even when you solved problems, you wouldn't let the teacher see. You'd hide your essays, afraid to let anyone read them. But things are different now. The exams are back. If you've got talent, you should show it. What's the point in hiding anymore?" Daniel wasn't capable of much, but he had always been kind. Back when my father was sent to the border and my mom and I were transferred from the commune to the farm, it was his family who secretly helped us. Without them, we would have been treated even worse. But now, I couldn't tell whose side he was really on. "I'm not taking the exam," I said. "Even if I do, I won't sit in the same room as Grace." I shook off his hand and sat down beneath a tree at the edge of the village, stubbornly refusing to move. Then Daniel suddenly changed. All the tenderness and care disappeared. He grabbed my hair and yanked, trying to pull me up from the ground. I had never seen him act so violently before. "You have to take the test with Grace," he growled. Once he got rough, I couldn't fight him off. He dragged me along the ground for over 10 meters, my cotton coat and pants ripping against the dirt. I screamed as loud as I could until a few villagers came running, holding hoes and sickles. That finally made Daniel back off and flee. One of the people who helped me was crazy old Mrs. Zhang from the village. She stared at me with wild eyes, muttering over and over, "Ghosts, spirits, ancestors." Then she suddenly threw her arms around me, trying to tie me up. I struggled, but the more I fought, the tighter she held me. "Good boy. Listen to me. You've got a curse on you. It has to be removed." Her sudden cry made me freeze. As much as I didn't want to believe in superstition, ever since Mom and I were sent down here, we'd witnessed and heard of so many strange things, unexplainable things. We had long since learned not to dig too deep. Mrs. Lair Zhang shifted me so she could look me straight in the face. "Girl, haven't you had terrible headaches lately? Haven't you heard strange chanting in your mind?" I nodded. That had happened a long time ago, back when my mom and I first arrived at the farm. As I spoke, something clicked in my mind. We had just been transferred from Lianjiang commune to the town farm, and we were living in that mud-walled house near the village entrance, the one Director Carter assigned us. It was during that time I started getting those stabbing headaches. I had cried to my mom, saying I felt like I was dying. I couldn't sleep at night. There was always someone whispering in my ear. My mom, worried sick, would sit with me every night. But before midnight, she'd always fall into a deep sleep and couldn't be woken up. I was so scared, I went to Daniel's house and asked his parents for help. They reluctantly agreed. Strangely enough, 3 days later, the headaches stopped, and the whispering vanished too. That was when my mom, convinced it was some kind of miracle, decided to set up an engagement between me and Daniel. Back then, I didn't know anything besides studying. I just thought it would be nice to have someone to play with, and figured we could think about the rest later. Mrs. Zhang shook me out of my thoughts. I came back to my senses. "Is there really something behind the headaches?" I asked, finally taking it seriously. I straightened my face and gave her my full attention. When she saw that I actually believed her, tears welled up in her eyes. "Good girl, someone put a curse on you. A wicked one. If it's not broken, it could be deadly. I can help you. but you have to trust me completely." The moment I heard there was a solution, I knelt down and gave her a deep bow. It wasn't a hasty act. This strange connection Grace had to my thoughts was too eerie. If every other possibility was ruled out, then even the impossible had to be considered. Mrs. Zhang told me that my boyfriend Daniel might be involved in the curse. This spell not only allowed someone to tap into another's mind, but it also absorbed the life force of the opposite sex nearby. And since Daniel was always hanging around me, there was no way he hadn't been affected. Judging from the way he yanked me around earlier, he probably had already performed some ritual to shield himself from the curse's side effects. I asked Mrs. Zhang what to do next. She went home and brought back a talisman, instructing me to carry it with me for 3 days, even while I slept. She warned me never to come into contact with Grace during that time. On the 3rd day, she would return to my home and burn the talisman to lift the curse. I thanked her sincerely, but I wasn't about to let this go so easily. "Mrs. Zhang, I won't lie to you. I've already died once. In my past life, I was destroyed by Director Carter and his family. In this life, I won't let them get away with it." Mrs. Zhang's face turned pale. "So, you came back because of a deep injustice. That makes things easier. A soul with unresolved vengeance can reverse a curse if we give the other party the talisman water to drink, but they must drink it for it to work." I did the math in my head. If I believed this, and I did, then all I had to do was follow Mrs. Zhang's instructions. That night, I told my mom everything, and moved down into our cellar to wait for the 3rd day when Mrs. Zhang would return to burn the talisman. But the next 3 days didn't go smoothly. On the very first night, Grace showed up at our house shouting for me. "Emily, if you don't come out, then I'm staying right here. I don't believe you'll hide forever." I could hear her loud and clear from the cellar beneath the house. Neighbors started coming out to see what was going on. "What's the matter?" they asked. Grace responded confidently. "Emily got my dad arrested. I'm here to demand an explanation." I nearly laughed out loud. Thankfully, Mrs. Zhang had warned me, if Grace stayed around me for too long, the connection in our minds could return. I had to cut off all interaction with her. She was probably planning exactly that, to stay nearby overnight, wait until my guard was down, and get me to solve some problems or give away information to stretch the link just long enough to help her pass the next exam. Luckily, I had already placed a second talisman Mrs. Zhang had given me on the main gate. That way, even if we were in the same courtyard, we wouldn't share the same mental space. But by midnight, Grace, still unable to find me, panicked. She shouted into the night, accusing me of being loose and shameless for not coming home to sleep. Her yelling drew Daniel's parents and several curious neighbors into the yard. So many people crowded in that they started trampling the gate, pressing the door so low the dirt underneath was exposed, stirring up clouds of dust that made me cough uncontrollably down in the cellar. I held my breath, terrified they'd discover me, my face flushed red from the effort. Daniel's mom, who was usually the understanding type, suddenly raised her voice. "Mrs. Liu, where is this girl of yours? Say something. A young girl not coming home at night? What kind of behavior is that? If our Daniel marries a girl like this, we'll be the laughingstock of the whole village." My mom had always taken that engagement seriously, almost like it was a sacred pact. But today, she let it go. "If you think it's such a disgrace," she said firmly, "then don't get married. Your family wants to marry my Emily? Well, I don't want Emily marrying your Daniel anymore." "What kind of nonsense is that?" Daniel's mother snapped. "If it weren't for our family helping Emily recover back then, would she even be alive and well like she is now?" Daniel's mother snapped. It was like something heavy slammed to the ground, the floor even trembled. Then my mom's voice rang out, steady and firm. "These are my daughter's dowry. Everything of value in our house is here. If you think we owe you for those past medical favors, take it all. But helping someone get better is one thing. I've never seen anyone demand marriage in return. I will not let my daughter marry into your family." The villagers who had gathered to watch the drama began whispering among themselves. "She's right. You can't just marry off your daughter as payment for a medical bill." Daniel's mother went pale with embarrassment. She lowered her head, and she and Daniel's father slipped away quietly, ignoring Grace's loud calls behind them. No matter how much she yelled, they didn't look back. When that plan failed, Grace sulked for a bit, then left our house early the next morning. Unsurprisingly, she didn't show up for the college entrance exam either. When asked, she claimed she was too sick to attend. 3 days later, Mrs. Zhang came to burn the talisman. I called Daniel over as well. I hadn't seen him in days, and he looked noticeably thinner. When he came face to face with Mrs. Zhang, I invited him to sit down, but instead, he dropped to his knees in front of me. Emily, my parents didn't mean to stir up trouble. We're still going to get married, right? Don't let gossip ruin what we have. As for what I did with the exam, I didn't think it through. I only did it for your own good. Without a diploma, you won't even be able to get city residency later. I smiled. No matter how hard things get, it's still better than being framed like in my last life. I pulled Daniel to his feet and said nothing more about it. Instead, I carefully collected the burnt ashes of the talisman, making sure he saw me tuck them away deep inside the cupboard. He asked, "What is that?" I gave him a mysterious smile. Mrs. Zhang said I was cursed. Someone could steal things from my mind. The curse hasn't fully lifted, so I need to suppress it with this potion. But if anyone else gets their hands on it, they might take everything from my brain. His fingers trembled slightly, and when he looked up at me, his pupils shook. We barely exchanged a few more words before I sent him home. Later that night, I heard movement by the cupboard. I knew then he'd come to steal it, but instead of giving the ashes to Grace, he drank it himself. Desire is a terrifying thing. I had thought Daniel was merely Grace's pawn, but it turned out he wanted to share the mind connection with me for himself. After he drank the potion, blood-curdling screams erupted from his home. His parents cried and wailed, summoning neighbors to help. People crowded into their courtyard and spilled all the way to our front door. Those who came back said Daniel had gone insane. At first, he had collapsed on the floor, unconscious, but after several slaps and loud shouts, he finally came to, only to start screaming that he was the daughter of the farm director. His parents were horrified, thinking he was possessed. They tried burning incense, praying to gods, and hiring a shaman, but nothing worked. Daniel eventually found a mirror and took one look at himself. He was so scared, he went into full panic. Without another word, he bolted straight for Director Carter's house. "Emily," the neighbors urged, "you should go with him. He's your fiancé, after all." Someone grabbed me and tried to pull me along to the director's house. I didn't follow. I simply stood far away, watching Daniel slam his head against the director's door like a madman. Director Carter opened the door, furious. The moment he saw Daniel, he kicked him square in the chest. "What the hell's your problem? It's the middle of the night? Don't people get to sleep anymore?" Daniel groaned in pain but still managed to cry out, "Dad!" Director Carter's wife exploded. "What did you just say?" She turned on her husband. "You better explain this right now." Grace came out then, her shoulders twitching, every bit a man in that moment. She stared at Daniel's mother, who was crying and dragging her son across the threshold, begging Director Carter to let them in, just to figure out what was happening. The gate closed behind them, blocking the view from outside. With no more drama to watch, the crowd finally dispersed. But Daniel's parents stayed there all night, waiting by the Carter family's front door. The next morning, Daniel finally came out, but he looked even more deranged. His body was covered in cuts, many of them still bleeding. He was screaming that he didn't recognize his own parents anymore. "If that's the case," he yelled, "then let's just end this family." Then he ran into town and reported Director Carter for taking bribes under the guise of plant procurement and for withholding personal files, blocking farm employees from transferring or returning to the city. After Daniel reported him, the authorities sent someone from higher up to investigate. Only then did the villagers realize that several female workers had been harassed by Director Carter over the years. But before the disciplinary action could even be issued, someone caught him in a sack and gave him a savage beating. He was knocked unconscious and left lying in a pile of cow dung overnight. By morning, he had frozen to death. His wife went out to look for him and was so frightened when she found his body that she lost all sense of direction. On her way back to get help, she slipped off a bridge and drowned in the river. When Grace learned that both her parents were dead and that an inspection team was going to search the house, she started wailing that she wasn't really their child. But no one believed her. Then one night, she stabbed Daniel to death with a knife. At first, no one believed it. Grace, that little girl? How could she possibly overpower Daniel, they said. But I knew the truth. Grace's strength came from having Daniel's thoughts in her mind. And Daniel didn't resist, because the version of Grace that existed in his brain had already convinced him that he couldn't beat her. I only came to understand this later, after asking Mrs. Zhang about it. She explained that if Grace had been the one to drink the ashes of the talisman, then all the knowledge she had stolen from my mind over the years would have been returned. But because Daniel had stolen and drunk it instead, something much worse had happened. They had swapped minds. And not only that, they were now bonded by life force. If one of them died, the other wouldn't survive either. Sure enough, before Grace could even be sentenced, she died under mysterious circumstances. Daniel's parents aged 10 years overnight upon hearing the news of their son's death. They wandered around in a daze every day, hollow-eyed and broken. My mom, seeing how both families had fallen apart, was filled with fear and unease. She held me tight and said, "As long as you're alive, that's enough." I smiled. "Mom, what are you talking about? I'm not just going to survive, I'm going to prepare for college." The following year, I became the only child from the farm to get accepted into a university. The new director was an upright man, and he personally led the villagers in banging drums and sending us off with cheers and celebration. My personal file was quickly transferred back to the city. That same year, my father was officially exonerated. Our family of 3 finally reunited in our city home. On New Year's Day, we sat together enjoying dumplings and watching the snow fall outside. Mrs. Zhang sent me a letter through one of the younger villagers. She said there was something strange about the old house my mom and I had lived in back on the farm. She believed Director Carter had chosen us specifically because we came from an intellectual family. They had wanted to perform a ritual to steal mental energy, but Daniel's family had accidentally interfered, and the spell had only half bonded. That's how Daniel ended up with a wife, while Grace could only access whatever thoughts were actively running through my mind. Later, when Daniel turned against them, it was likely because he realized I was no longer of any use to him. Holding the letter in my hand, I couldn't help but think of everything that had happened a year ago. It all felt like some surreal dream, but thank goodness, this time the dream didn't devour me. I set the letter down and picked up my book. My family sat around me, warm and close. In this life, I could finally hold my head high and be a clean, honest student. And honestly, that was enough.